Okay, I think we're good to go ahead and get started. Thank you everybody for joining us today. This is the first event in the Emerging Leaders Speaker Series, which is presented in partnership with Benchmark Strategies. I'm Kat. I'm the Associate Director here at the Massachusetts Women's Political Caucus, and I'll be your moderator today. The MWPC is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization committed to increasing the number of women in elected office and appointed public policy positions. We seek to engage women of all ages in the political process through events, workshops, and exciting programming like this series. We celebrated our 50th anniversary this year, and I hope you'll keep turning in or tuning in all year to keep celebrating with us. We're thrilled to partner with Benchmark Strategies for this program, and I'll turn it over to my friends Nicole and Jessica to tell you a little bit more about it.
Yes, hello everyone. My name is Nicole Herendine, and I'm the Assistant Vice President of Public Affairs at Benchmark Strategies. Benchmark Strategies is a Boston-based public affairs and public relations consulting firm. Our team is proud to collaborate with over 175 companies and organizations from around the world, and today we are proud to partner with Massachusetts Women's Political Caucus to present their Emerging Leaders Speaker Series.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jessica Morris. I'm also an Assistant Vice President of Public Affairs at Benchmark Strategies. And we are so pleased to kick off our series this evening with at-large City Councilor Ruthzee Louijuene. Councilor Louijuene is newly elected to the Boston City Council and has been fighting on issues of housing and home ownership, education access, and civic participation. The daughter of working class immigrants from Haiti, Ruthzee was born and raised in Mattapan and Hyde Park, attended Boston Public Schools, and went on to receive degrees from Columbia University, Harvard Law School, and Harvard Kennedy School of Government. As the first Haitian American elected to represent Boston citywide, Councilor Louijuene is an experienced lawyer and has fought for families facing eviction and foreclosure and supported voting rights cases before the U.S. Supreme Court. She has also previously served as the Council on Senator Warren's presidential campaign. So welcome, Councilor. Please feel free to introduce yourself to the group. We're so excited and so happy to have you.
Thank you so much, Jessica, and thank you so much, Kat. When I started running, one of the first pieces of advice that I got was you got to get the endorsement of support of the Massachusetts Women's Political Committee, right? Committee. And I was like, okay, you got to figure out how to get that done and how to get your support. And I just really appreciate how much I've learned from our partnership and also just from the questions. Charlotte Golar-Ritchie is someone who I look up to as a Black woman in politics, and knowing about her connection to MWPC really, I think, was really helpful in understanding how to get support and really the minefields that I would face as a Black woman candidate in the city of Boston and in generally as a woman in politics. So I just want to thank, again, WPC for all you do for me, for all you do for other women running for office, because it's hard out here. I remember one of the first things that I would experience as a new candidate was people telling me that I seem eager, but that I'm young. And I would tell this to other electeds, past and present, other female electeds, past and present, and they would, share my frustration at people labeling me in such a manner, but then also tell me how to combat it. So rather than saying that I bring in addition to saying that I bring a fresh perspective, also, talking about all of my experience and all of the things that I've done, which is not necessarily how I like to lead, but so that people know that I sort of had this foundation and grounding. It wasn't just a fresh and energetic face, that I actually have experience to back up the things that I want to accomplish here in the city. So again, grateful to the Massachusetts Women's Political Caucus, to Charlotte Golar-Ritchie, who I knew was wanted to be on this call but couldn't at this moment, and to everyone who really helped to advise me along the way. So I'm a newly elected. I've been in office for about 3.5 months now, so still a lot of learning. I was actually really grateful to see Benchmark, a lot of folks from Benchmark like Jessica and Nicole yesterday at Boston blooms. So it's really great to go out and see people who you've only seen over Zoom or have met only a few times. But I'm grounded in the work that I'm doing to build a more just and more equitable city of Boston, to create a city for young kids that is the city that I would have wanted to see and experience when I was growing up, to really fight for racial justice and climate justice, and making sure we're centering those who are too often excluded from our city and from accessing the resources of our city, whether they be Black or brown, whether they be folks who are returning home for behind the wall, our incarcerated or formerly incarcerated brother and sisters, to our immigrant communities, to our LGBTQ plus community. I'm really excited to be the chair of our Civil Rights and Immigrant Advancement Committee, because those are issues that I care about deeply, and to be vice chairing our housing committee, so that I can continue to do the work of representing the needs of our rental market and our home and for burgeoning homeowners. We know that we live in a city that is increasingly unequal, and where housing is an excessive cost for so many of our families. So I'm excited. I mean, I'll just give you an example. Today I was at Boston International School for newcomers in Dorchester, and it was such a phenomenal, heart-filling experience where I was talking to students from all across the world whose parents decided to make Boston their home, talking to them about diversity and democracy, and how we can all come together to create a more robust democracy, and how that includes voting, that includes protests, that includes writing op-eds, it includes standing up for your ally or your neighbor when they're facing discrimination of any sort. I told them a story about, one of them, this is always a really great question. They were like, young kids love asking, have you ever faced any racism or sexism as a lawyer? And I'm always like, do I have stories for you? And I told them about a story about when I was a practicing attorney working on a recount in Maine. And I was the senior attorney on the case, but the opposing attorney, a white man, would always come and talk to the junior male attorney, the white male attorney, whenever he had a question. And I would be like, what are you doing? I'm the senior attorney. And the junior attorney, also he went to law school with me. So, hopefully he was also like aware to the issues that women and Black women lawyers face. He would say to the opposing counsel, no. If you have a question about the case, you don't talk to me, you talk to Ruthzee. She's the senior attorney on this case. And just to give them examples of the barriers that women of color face as they try to progress in their profession, but also the importance of allyship, and also of speaking up when there's something wrong happening, even if it's not directly to you, and how that's how we build a more just and more equitable democracy. So I probably talked too long. I'm really excited to be here. I didn't give you all my bio, but I think Mattapan, Hyde Park, still both places where I live. I live right on the border right now, so I don't really have to choose. Parents are great Haitian working class immigrants. My father has 4 daughters. Parents have 4 daughters, and so my father, by hook or by crook, was a feminist growing up and teaching me and my 3 sisters that we could dare to dream and be all of the things that we wanted to be. So I'm happy to always share that message with our young women, especially our young women of color. And I'm happy to be here. I don't know if I spoke too long or if I spoke about the things I should have, but there you go.
That was perfect. Thank you so much. So we have some prepared questions that we'd love to ask you, but I want to invite our participants to also put your questions in the chat. We'll be turning to them specifically a little bit later in the hour, but do feel free to just toss them in as we chat. Yeah, thank you so much. That was perfect. That does bring us, I think, to our first question. We want to talk about something that happened 1 week ago. So there was a really important barrier broken, and one that Congresswoman Presley has been calling a concrete ceiling. I'm sure you all know what I'm talking about. Associate Justice designate Ketanji Brown Jackson was confirmed to the Supreme Court and will be the first Black woman to serve on the nation's highest court. I just want to take a second to reflect on this historic confirmation. You've spoken about your experience in law. I know that you've shared law school. And we just want to reflect on what this means for Black women, specifically in law and public policy, to belong in these spaces. I was wondering if we could kick it off there.
Yeah, I mean, every time I actually think about it, like I actually get chills and my eyes start to water, just because I don't know if I've been talking about it so much, and just because like things move so fast, so you don't really get these times for deep reflection, because I'm always like go, go, go. But what a moment in time. It is like, there is so much to celebrate and to laud in the appointment of Ketanji Brown Jackson, right? I always like to tell people about the shoulders, especially the shoulders of Black women, on whose shoulders I stand. I think about my own grandmother who couldn't read or write, and where I've come myself as a lawyer. I think about Ketanji Brown Jackson, not only as a Black woman lawyer, but for me and for my sister. You know, I wear my hair in crochet braids. My sister has dreadlocks. I'm a dark-skinned female. There's so many layers to this that are so emotional and so powerful that when I do get the moment to sit and reflect, it is just overwhelming and amazing. And not only that she's the first Black female justice, God willing, right? But that she's also was a public defender. So bringing that very important, progressive, justice-oriented, none of us are the worst things we've ever done lens to the Supreme Court. It's just overwhelming and powerful. I had the honor to go down for a day with my sister, who is an assistant district attorney here, started off on Rachel Vollin's campaign, to watch the confirmation hearings for a day. And it was just, it filled my whole heart. So it just, such a powerful moment that we're living in, that our young girls can see, that our young Black girls can see. I'm already calling her the phenomenal KBJ, not to rain on the notorious RBG's parade. And yeah, we share a law school in common, so that's cool, but it's really just like who she is and everything she represents to me as a Black woman, as a Black woman attorney, what she represents to my, sister, her beautiful sister locks, her beautiful children, the way that her husband supported her, and how hard it is for her to get where she's been. And I always, like I said, I always like to give honor to all the women, all the Ketanjis who should have been, right? We've had centuries of white men on the Supreme Court, and there's no reason it should have been centuries of white men. There were a number of great women, a number of women of color, Black women who could have been in that seat, who tried to pierce that ceiling, and who really served as a foundation for Ketanji to be where she is. And even if for those whose names we don't know, and for the ones we do know, like Constance Motley, we owe them a great debt. And so I am just really just overwhelmed, as you can tell, whenever I get the chance to talk about what it means.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. It's an incredible moment. I wanted to move a little bit to your biography. You were born and raised in Boston. You're the daughter of immigrants, and your first job was actually a walking tour guide with My Town. And you're also a proud graduate of Boston Public Schools. You mentioned earlier that you're in your first few months on the council. And I was wondering if you could tell us about how your lived experience growing up here in Boston has informed your first couple of months here, or first couple of months working on the council.
Yeah, so my first job was when I was 14. I talked to the students about it today. Like, I was just trying to get paid, y'all. I was like, my friends are wearing Jordans. My parents won't buy me Jordans. We didn't have cable. They're not trying to spend money on nothing fun. I just wanted a job. And I just think about how lucky my sister's first job was at Burger King. My oldest sister, my second sister's first job was, I don't know if you all remember the red shirts. For those of you who grew up in Boston, it was like Mayor Meany's program. And it's a great job, but it was just like, you would be picking up litter on the side of the street, and that was your summer job. And I got to work for a phenomenal organization at the age of 14. Shout out to Burger King. First job, we got Whoppers for days, okay? So I'm not like hating on Burger King being the first job. When I was 14, I got a job where I got paid to learn, and I got paid to have the sense that I could have an ownership stake in the city, that I learned about cross-race and cross-cultural coalitions that came together in the South End, in Jamaica Plain, and in Cambridge to really stop the construction of a community-destroying highway. And instead, after 8 years of lobbying, no one individually who thought that they could stop this highway, but collectively their power, the power of protest, their power of coalition building prevented the governor, or the governor decided not to build a highway. And if anyone has ever taken a stroll through Southwest Corridor Park, we have Southwest Corridor Park because of folks who really protested against urban renewal projects that were destroying community. And so I think about that. You know, I've been having an interesting time as like a newly elected and I don't even think I've talked to you, Emily, about this. Emily is on here. She's my chief of staff. And I think, and she was also my campaign manager. Just so shout out to all the people working behind the scenes who make campaigns and everything work, because I would not be anywhere, not in this seat, without Emily. What I've been forcing myself to do is at times when my brain is trying to switch into becoming a politician, to remember that what does Ruthzee the resident want? What would Ruthzee the teenager who worked at my town want for this city? And really think about policy through that lens. And I think when I do that, this work actually becomes a little bit easier. And so I think that work from when I was 14, of, you know, giving tour guides, but also really about, you know, community building and feeling like who I was, and the story of Black people, of Black women, of all people coming together to fight for what they want, is how you get change in a city, whether as a resident or as an elected. And about part of my responsibility as an elected is to really listen to folks who are pushing for change and making sure that we are responding affirmatively to the need for affordable housing, the need for more green space, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. We have a question in the chat about, did that job begin your journey to public life?
Yeah, I mean, so my town no longer exists. It was an organization that was founded by two really amazing Black women. Some of you may know one of them, Carolyn Crockett. She was the first chief equity officer for the city. Marty Walsh appointed her after in June 2020, after the murder of George Floyd, when all these cities and governments were sort of trying to grapple with how they respond. And I think, and I learned to give tours. I was a 14, 15-year-old giving tours, learning public speaking, and also really engaging in community building with my fellow peers. And I think that was my first exposure to what it looks like to build coalitions to affect change in our community. Carolyn Crockett is she's an urban planner, among the many things that she is. She's a policymaker, and that's how she grounded the work of my town, creating spaces for young people to really think about their built environment and how they can help structure that. Yes, it was about giving tours, but it was about so much more than that. And so I think it was definitely part of my own political awakening. My first protest was when I was 7 with my father. It was related to the Haitian president who was in exile. My second protest was when I was at my town, when the Silver Line, which was instituted, it was actually supposed to be a train line. And then back in 1986, they took down the elevated train, which ran through Roxbury, and they promised the community a train line, but they didn't get that. Instead, they got the Silver Line. So I was out there at age 14, 15 with my fellow youth guides at my town with Carolyn Crockett protesting, saying, they call it a train, but it's really a bus. And they use that Silver Line as the mechanism, as an excuse for increasing fares. And we know that when you increase fares, it's regressive on low-income folks. It's regressive on Black and brown folks who depend on public transportation, who depend on buses to get from A to B. So it's a part of my political awakening, yes. And then my next job after that, I worked for Marie St. Fleur, who was the first Haitian American elected in the city of Boston, to the legislature. And oftentimes it's difficult to be what you can't see. And I was able to see that from, if you know Marie, she's an amazing orator. She's an amazing justice seeker. So the fact that I got that experience when I was 16 and my first job at 14 were definitely formative.
That's really incredible. So we have another question in the chat. I think it ties in nicely with where we wanted to go anyway. So you mentioned that interning for Representative Marie St. Fleur. You also worked on Elizabeth Warren's campaigns, and you've knocked on doors for candidates and worked to elect progressive prosecutors. And what inspired you to run for office? When did you decide, like, yes, this is something I want to do? And then second part of the question, how do you, if any advice for women on how to break through as a first-time candidate?
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to say two concrete things. I talk too long. So I'm going to say two concrete things. Well, I'm going to answer the second question first so I don't forget it. I remember when I was in law school and Harvard Law School women's group, or I forget what the name was, they had like a reunion event on campus. And I remember I just walked into one event and it was about women running for office. And all I remember is like someone saying it is so hard for women to raise money. And that's why we don't have a lot of women in politics. And that's all I remember. So I remembered that. I remembered someone saying how daunting it was to raise money, especially on the federal level, and how difficult it is. So I think it was a question about what the difficulties, or I just want to make sure I got the question right.
No, that's it. That's the question was, I think, originally about how to break through to voters as first-time candidate. But
Okay.
The NWC offers office hours to first-time candidates, and the question about how to raise money comes up a lot. So if you can share a little bit about how you were successful there, that would also, I think, be great. People in the audience who would love to hear about that.
So I will say is that I have many strengths. One of them is not organization. Like I'm not organized. Like I just don't have, I've never, sent out Christmas cards or holiday cards. I've never Rolodexed myself. So that was the first thing that I had to do. And it was a very, very painful process of everyone I've known from all my jobs and schools and life and family. It was very painful. I had to do it to get this going. And I had friends help me out when it became overwhelming. But then it was important because I then called a lot of those people and told them that I was running for office. And if I could count on their support day one to make a strong showing. And a lot of them came through and I raised $50,000 in my first 24 hours, which was a really big deal for a first-time candidate. And I would not have done that if I didn't take the advice that other politicals had given me, which is to Rolodex myself, which was very painful for someone who was not organized, but it was so important. And then I think the first question that you asked, what was it again? So that I don't.
No, absolutely. It's so going kind of to the chat here. So how did you decide that that you were going to run? It's a really big decision.
It is a really big decision.
We have a couple folks in the audience who are thinking about it. So how did you come to that? And what advice would you give people in the audience who are thinking about running for office?
Yeah. So I knew that I wanted to work in government. I had been an advisor to principals, whether it's Elizabeth Warren, Marie St. Fleur in the past, and I worked on campaigns. Believe it or not, I think there's a way of looking at my bio where it's like, oh, she was always going to run for office, but it really wasn't the case. I had actually come to a point, when I didn't think I wanted to work on a presidential campaign. I was like, I don't think I want to do this. Like, I think I want to exit the whole political campaign world. But there's something, if you've worked on a campaign before, when you find your candidate and when you really believe in them, it is really hard to say, no, that I don't believe that I can take another job that, won't have the impact of potentially electing the president of this country. And so for me, honestly, it was being honest with myself about how I thought best to use my talents and how to show up in this world and what it meant. Like, so I knew I wanted to work for government. Did that mean, could I do that as an advisor to an elected official? Absolutely, I had done it in the past. Could I be the person that is elected? What was missing from the discourse? And I think, I'm the first Haitian American elected. Emily can tell you how many calls in a day we field from members of the Haitian community, from members of immigrant communities. We had 2 weeks ago, a family that only speaks Spanish, and my Spanish is so-so, walk in, who was displaced from a fire, and she walked into City Hall, and all she had on a piece of paper was my name, and people directed her to my office. I think about how much I care and love people and how I believe in what it means to be a good neighbor. And that is the calling that I'm answering. So yes, folks encouraged me to run. There was a time I threw my phone away and was like, stop, because it really has to be a personal decision. So I wasn't trying. It is good to have encouragement because it helps, it means a lot to have other people believe in you. But it really has to be a decision that you make yourself about how best to show up in this world. And so for me, I'm also very spiritual, very Christian. And so I had to pray on it a lot. And I made the decision to run. And was really comforted by the support that I got. It's not an easy decision because it shouldn't be, and because it's difficult work, and it really is about public service. And while it does take some ego, of course, to believe that you are someone who can be elected, it also takes a lot of humility, because the days are long, the work is hard, and like, it's not all sunshine and rainbows. But I really believe that we need to create good government, and we have to have forward thinkers. We have to have people who want to center those who are often marginalized, who have been historically excluded, who want to think about equity as the corrective action that we have to do and take to correct for the policy wrongs that we've done. And so all of that came together. And I was also like not really employed at the time. So I was like, okay, well, this is maybe a good time. And I decided to run. So I think hopefully in there were nuggets of, if you are yourself deciding to run or thinking about whether it's the right calling, whatever it is that is your personal place that you go to make decisions, go and retreat there, do a lot of writing, do a lot of thinking, and just game out what your game plan is. And hopefully you have people in your network that you can bounce ideas off of and who can help you think about your strengths and weaknesses.
That's a great answer. So I think we have a couple of policy specific questions about housing. You mentioned transit earlier, but before we go there, Freddie K put a question in the chat, who is the founder and president of one of our sister organizations. And I just wanted to give her permission to unmute and ask the question herself.
That's so nice. Thank you, Kat. Really appreciate that. Hi, Freddie K here. So I'm with Suffrage 100 Massachusetts, and we commemorate all of the work that women did through decades and centuries for the vote, both up to the 19th Amendment and beyond, to the Voting Rights Act of 1965 and the laws that needed to be changed after the 19th Amendment, 1920, and that took up till 1965 for Native American women vote, for Asian American women vote, et cetera. So we focus a fair amount on history. And my question is about what's your experience in running for office or in talking with your constituents about whether there is a benefit for people to know some of this history, which I think we don't know. We were not brought up with this history, frankly, any of it. And so for people to learn about that, and hopefully, potentially, and I don't know how you feel, but as a means to both inspire more people to vote, to appreciate and exercise their right to vote, given what people went through to get the vote, and also to inspire people like yourself to run for office. Thank you.
Those are great questions, and thank you, Freddie, for all the work that you do. I'll say this, is that it's also important for me that I always talk about my presence and who I am as part of a continuum. And I talk about all of the women who came before me and all of the women who will come after me as we try to build a more equitable and more just city. I talk about Melnia Katz, who has a boulevard named after her, and unfortunately we've come to shorten and know Mass and Cass area as a problematic area without knowing Melnia Katz was a giant who fought for voting rights, who fought against poverty, who founded ABCD, whose legacies, even if not unelected, is important for me. I also talk about, all those who came before me. The first Black woman to win an at-large seat in the city of Boston, Jean McGuire, right? And we were in the conversation now talking about an elected school committee. She was the first elected at-large to the Boston School Committee. And so for me, it's also important to put myself in this continuum, because it is important to remind myself and for others to remind, like, no one got here alone. And I am learning from those who came before. And, as much as I think that I will do these things that are great and hopefully revolutionary, others have done great and revolutionary things, and those who come after me. So it's also a way of balancing egos that come up in this profession, to understand yourself as part of a continuum and as part of a tapestry of folks who are doing this work. And so I always talk about history because I think it's important. I also think it's important for Black folks, for young kids to know that attempt is important, even if you're not always successful. There are many things that I have failed at and that I have not been successful at. There are many barriers that have, like we talk about Ketanji Brown Jackson, she's the first, but she probably shouldn't have been, right? There are so many women who should have been, and we may not know all of their names, but we honor their attempt, and we honor despite all the barriers that they face. So I think that's important. I think the second question was about inspiring women to run. I just think we live in a hard society, and I think politics is a hard game, and I think it's hard for women. I think the hours can be long. I think the attacks, especially in the society that we live in now, it can be really hard on women. But that's why it's really important to be grounded in your why and on what is really pushing you to enter the arena that can be a really hard arena to exist in. And so always being grounded in your why and having your tribe of people who will remind you of your why is critical in this game.
Thank you so much.
Freddie, I hope that answered your question.
Freddie, I can't see you on the screen. Are you out? Did they answer your question?
You're muted, Freddie.
There we go. Thank you. Yes, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And I want to thank you for your work and for running and for all that you're doing. Thank you very much and for being here today.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. I wanted to chat a little bit about some specific policies and things that are happening right now, starting with housing, which I know is a big one and a really vast topic. And as an attorney, so, you've represented families facing eviction and foreclosure, and you've worked with the Massachusetts Affordable Housing Alliance, and you've also made affordable housing and homeownership a priority for your tenure as city councilor. Specifically, we know rent in Boston is going up significantly this year. I recently saw a number of 20%. So I want to start with first, what's exacerbating housing insecurity in Boston, and what policy solutions are out there, both in the city council and any collaboration you would need to do outside of the city council.
Awesome. So what's exacerbating the crisis is a speculative market that has really forced housing costs to go up, inflation, we see an increase in construction costs, and we have a limited supply, right? A very limited supply of housing. And so that causes prices to go up. And we have a lot of people who want to live in Boston, who want to stay in Boston. They go to Suffolk, they go to Boston College, they come here, they love it, it's great, it's fun, and they stay. And we want all this population to stay. We don't want competition with residents who've been here, who grew up here and can't afford to live here because the salaries that they are making aren't matching the salaries that these tech companies or life science companies can pay to these new grads. And so that's putting a lot of tension on our housing market. We've seen a lot of development in the last, 10 years. We haven't seen enough affordable housing development. We require private developers to build 13% affordability into their properties. I call a 13% requirement a displacement policy, because you're just not building enough affordable. And so we are having a hearing next week. I'm vice chair of the housing committee. We're having a hearing on the inclusionary development policy. It's that 13% policy. See what we need to do to increase it. I got an email 3 or 4 weeks ago now that really broke my heart from a Black woman, 35 years old, grew up in the city here, grew up in public housing, transitioned to housing the private market, went to our public schools, is now working at the Pine Street Inn, had worked at St. Francis House, making a salary of $61,000 gross income, and is not, makes too much to meet the requirement for a restricted unit that she was applying for. And so part of the reason is IDP, the inclusionary development policy, is based on your gross income. And we know that there's a difference between what you gross and what you net. And then when you think about, I feel this particularly as a woman, as a Black woman, working class, who often, I tell people money in my family goes up, it doesn't come down. So like my sister and I, we help our parents out as necessary. This woman in this email, she's like, and whenever my family needs anything, I got to pitch in there. So I don't understand. I'm going to have to leave Boston. And that is exactly the type of person who we need to make sure can live and afford to rent here. And so we're hoping that our IDP policy can help address that. So there's an affordability issue, the supply issue. We just need to be doing a lot more building. I can bore you with the details, but there's a lot we can do with our bond policy here. We have a AAA bond rating as a city that's very strong fiscal strength. And our bond rating is something that allows us to borrow at a good price to build. And I think we should be doing more of that. We need to be building for a public purpose. And we have, anyways, there are lots of ways that we can be building in the city. And then homeownership, right? Homeownership is how one way of building wealth here. We know that the racial wealth gap here is pernicious, and we have a lot of work to do to close that. And so I am a member of the Massachusetts Affordable Housing Alliance. Before I was elected, helped them negotiate $10 million for first generation homeownership. We know that housing isn't only going, we have so much work to do. It's not going to be the end all be all. But it is an important part to closing that racial wealth gap. And so that's work that I am going to continue to do on city council by seeing if we can increase the number of banks that are providing affordable and sustainable home mortgage products to working class families here in the city of Boston, helping with down payment and closing costs, building more affordable home ownership opportunities, all of those things.
Yeah. So you mentioned there's a hearing next week. We have a couple questions in the chat about some specific things that are happening. For people in the audience who are interested in, working on building more affordable housing or working on these kind of policies, how would you recommend they get involved?
So you can send us an email. Emily will put it in the chat, our email. You can testify. There's a hearing next Friday that's open, that I mentioned, that's open to public testimony. It's at 10 a.m. You can sign up to testify. A low-key, really good way to help increase affordable housing is if you live in the city of Boston or wherever you live, really join your local community group, because there's a lot of NIMBYism that can prevent affordable housing from being built. So if we are the ones, if we care about affordable housing and we show up in those spaces and someone's saying, I don't want this new building, I don't want affordability here because it's going to bring trouble, whatever that means, having a counter voice there saying, no, we need affordable housing here because our city is in crisis, because we believe that housing is a human right and everyone should have a place to call home. It is why we need to support affordability. So those are some ways that you can get involved. Let me look at the chat. I support rent control. And my father is a landlord. He still owns our childhood home, a 2-family house in Mattapan. Rent control is important for us to have the local option to decide how we can help regulate a very speculative and hot market. We can exempt small time landlords. We really need to be going after the corporate landlords that are really pushing our working class families out of the city. Solution for developers taking over 3-deckers to sell as luxury condos and avoid the city's affordable unit rules. There is a condo conversion ordinance that requires notice to the city. I believe it's for 4 or more units, so that's the way that triple deckers get around that. But the city has an acquisition opportunity program that allows CDCs and small time developers to purchase these triple deckers and provides them with financial assistance to do so. So really, I want to look into expanding those opportunities. Also, the work that we do with community land trusts to support their work. Community land trusts are a great model of communal ownership for both rental and home ownership that helps to take land and homes off of the speculative market. So that's another really great model. But sadly, neighborhood associations aren't regulated by any city or state government, and they are more red tape. They can often be more red tape. Emily and I can talk to you for a very long time about strengths and weaknesses of neighborhood organizations. You can also start your own. There's one called Dorchester Not For Sale, and they work on to push back against overdevelopment that is pushing out Black and brown families. Another great organization that I worked with and I was representing families facing eviction and foreclosure is City Life Vida Urbana, based out of Jamaica Plain. They really do that cross-race, cross-class coalition building that is so important to pushing back against the savagery of a speculative market that often is pushing out our working class families.
I do want to acknowledge Dr. Yvonne Spicer, who's here, who just asked a question. She's former mayor of Framingham. Thank you for joining. She's also on the MWPC board. She's our new
Hi, Mayor. Yeah, I saw you here. I wanted to shout you out. I'm glad that Kat did it before I did.
Yeah, so that's a great question. Dr. Spicer has a background in education, and she wanted to know your thoughts on education in Boston and then in the Commonwealth. Dr. Spicer, I'll let you unmute if you want to chime in at all here.
I am so just enthralled by your enthusiasm, your energy, your passion. Ruthzee, I mean, you know, I owe you a hug, and once because I just am so proud of the work that you have been doing. And the passion it just oozes out of your pores. And I also know how hard this work is, and just trying to think about it holistically, you know, how do you build the armor around you to do this work? So, you know, and of course I'm listening to the concerns around education in Boston and some of the transition that is happening, and just wanting to get a pulse from you, what your thinking is on that.
Thank you, and thank you again for Legacy Continuum, right? Like you know about, I'm like emotional, you know about the need, how important it is to build an armor, because this is not for the faint of heart. It really ain't. It's not for women. It's not for the faint of heart. For women, for Black women, right? Like, yeah, I have a good bio, maybe, but I come from a working class family, so this joint is hard, right? I'm still trying to help out my family to have dreams for what I want to do for them. So it's hard, and like the work is nonstop because I'm at large, and I love it. I love showing up in all of our neighborhoods. But I talked to Emily, and I was like, Emily, we got to look at what we can do about my calendar, because maybe I'm trying to bite off too much, right? And so it's recognizing when you got to call yourself out. And like, I'm an extrovert. I get my energy from people. I love being out, but you know, I'm trying to be in this for as long as my calling is. And so in order to do that, got to make sure there's some self-preservation involved. Education, that's like a whole big one, right? So we're talking about school committee. We need an elected school committee in the city of Boston. There's no reason why we should be the exception in the entire state to having an elected school committee, to really bringing democracy to the people. And so we're talking about that in the city. We're talking about receivership. Well, the state is trying to talk about receivership, and we're trying to say, no, like, we don't need to be talking about that, because we know that receivership has not worked in a lot of the cities where the state has tried to take over. We talk about pushing back against the narrative that we're spending too much money and not seeing any returns. Boston Public Schools does a really bad marketing job of the ways in which it is succeeding. The answer is actually pouring more resources. I mean, today, just heartbreaking at the school when I was at, and I was talking to the kids, and they were like, we want a gym, we want a basketball team. And then another kid was like, we want an elevator and a library. And then another kid was like, no, we can't ask for too much. I'm like, since when is an elevator and a library asking for too much? And then another student was talking about how she feels jealous when she sees schools that have these things. And it is our duty to provide young kids with buildings and school facilities that affirm their dignity and that allow them to believe and dream that they can be all things. So I'm someone, as a BPS kid, I've seen it all. I've seen the good and the bad. I've been in it. I also know that people will call my elementary school maybe an average or underperforming school, but for me, I went there for 7 years, and that stability was beautiful. And that stability is what brought my father into the school system, when my father learned about parent activism, why I couldn't act up because my father was always peering through the window, and about creating environments where we can have, when we can really bring our parents in. So, I mean, that's just a little bit about what I think about PPS. We have this really great, we have ESSER money coming in. We have the Student Opportunity Act that great champions like Senator Sonia Ching Diaz and others have really fought for. And now is the time for us to really believe in the brilliance of all of our kids and really affirm that with our dollars and with the resources that we pour in, with more guidance counselors, beautiful facilities, access to athletics, dual language immersion programs, better college connectivity and connectivity to the trades for, you know, especially for our women. So those are just some top, what do they call it? Top lines. Yeah.
Oh. Okay, awesome, amazing. Checking the chat real quick. Okay, thank you so much. So in general, since you started on Boston City Council, can you share with us some of the policies you've put forward that advance equity, access, and racial justice? I know those are kind of in the center of your work, but if you can share with us some specific policies.
Yeah, so I gave my maiden speech on shared prosperity, which is like this big, like elusive, like what does that mean? But I just believe in, you know, I'm not knocking the ability of the developing community to be able to prosper, but my neighbors should be prospering. We should all be prospering if we are experiencing this building boom. And so part of that is like, you know, sometimes it requires like conversations about these really wonky things like bonds. right? To understand like that we have more capacity to be doing the equity work that we need to do. So when you tell me we ain't got it, I'm like, nah, look at our, we got money and we have the policy and we have the ability. If we tweak these things here and there, that's more money into Roxbury, that's more money into Mattapan, that's more money into Dorchester, that's beautiful buildings that we can be building. And, you know, so that's one thing. We also need to make sure that our Boston residents are getting access to great jobs in the construction space, and that women and people of color are getting those jobs. So in 2 weeks, we'll be holding a hearing on the Boston residents job policy, seeing how we've been succeeded in meeting those benchmarks and how we've been failing. There's been too much failure. Next week, we're holding a hearing on returning citizens. Folks who have spent time incarcerated, when they come home, they face a number of obstacles. And I care about making people whole. And I care about those who are too often forgotten and excluded from policy making, from our budget, from resources. So the goal is to get more money, more resources to our Office of Returning Citizens, and do more partnership with community-based organizations that are often led by formerly incarcerated, justice-involved folks themselves around mental health, workforce development, and there's a third issue, mental health. There's an access to IDs issue and housing. Obviously housing, you know, there's a great organization founded by a woman named Leslie Credo herself, formerly incarcerated, who's been doing really great work around creating more housing options for those who are formerly incarcerated, because there are a lot of barriers to accessing federal housing, to going to living with your family who are in living in Section 8 or other federally subsidized properties. So really thinking about how we can creatively use some of our ARPA money from the federal government to help support those who are returning home. Because if we want to prevent people from, none of us are the worst things we've ever done. And if we believe in that, and if we believe in making people whole, then we need to make sure that we're providing resources to make the transition home as easy and as stable as possible for a very vulnerable population. And so those are just some of the things. We're doing other stuff too. The Haitian community is a big one. And so I've been doing a lot of organizing around my beloved community that is sometimes hard, but is always loving. So.
Yeah, that's a truly incredible amount of work, different things you're working on. I definitely see what you're saying about your calendar earlier. It sounds like you're very busy. So with that in mind, we have about 10 minutes left, and I want to make sure we get you off here at the right time. I have a couple more questions that came in over email, but I also wanted to ask a little MWPC question while we're here. When we talk to elected officials, some of our favorite stories are about women collaborating with other women to get things done, both in the buildings they work in or, you know, with community organizations. Do you have a favorite story you can share with us?
Collaborating. I mean, so what's really great about the Boston City Council right now is that it's a majority woman council, right? And so, you know, I'm partnering with the housing chair, who's also a woman, and we're doing the hearing on inclusionary development policy. I've been doing a lot of work with our Ways and Means chair, right? First time we have a Black woman who's the head of Ways and Means, Tanya Fernandez Anderson, thinking about how we can do better at allocating resources to our communities. But I mean, one great example is Emily, who was on the call with me, who oftentimes, you know, again, you are nothing without your staff and without a great staff. And so Emily is always thinking one step ahead of the things that I need. And I'm so grateful for her and the work that she's done. I don't know if that's a story, but, you know, she's there. It's interesting. Like, you know, I never thought, I was like, what do I want in a chief of staff? I do want someone who, like, when like yesterday I got out of the car and my cardigan was an inside out, which happens more often than I'd like to admit. And Emily was like, your cardigan's on inside out. And I was like, oh, okay, I'll put it on. Or like, you know, my dress isn't fully zipped up. Or, you know, I don't have the briefing document that I need for this next hearing. And so, you know, women empower other women. We lift as we climb. And that's a philosophy. I have my staff, I have 4 staffers, 3 of them are women. And I have 3 staffers, 2 of them are women, I'm including myself. And they're phenomenal and they're great. I don't know if that was a story. I mean, me and Emily and my other staffer, we all have matching Telfar bags, matching green Telfar bags. And people like to laugh and make fun of us, but we love it. So just something.
Well, if you discover something great, just stick with it. No reason to go find something else. That's, I love that. It doesn't need to be a story. I just love hearing about, women lifting up other women as, as they move forward. So we did get a great question over email about liquor licenses. It sounds like Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley was a great champion for reform when she was a Boston City Councilor, and there's more we need to do on the issue. So currently licenses are granted in batches of just a handful, and they're non-transferable. So how can non-transferable licenses, which don't have a value on the open market, help build wealth within marginalized communities that are already so severely underserved by these licenses?
That's an excellent question. I'm not sure who asked it, but send me an email because it sounds like you have really great ideas and want to talk more about it. So I proposed last week or 2 weeks ago now. Another thing that I've been working on that I didn't mention is liquor licenses with my colleague Brian Worrell, who represents District 4, the poorest district in the city of Boston, Mattapan, Dorchester, slivers of JP and Rosendale. And we need to get more liquor licenses into our neighborhoods. And liquor license, if you want to buy a liquor license right now, so part of the reason is it's draconian. Our liquor licenses are controlled by the state, and there's a cap and there's a hard cap, and there are no liquor licenses left under that cap from the state. So whenever we want an additional liquor license, we have to go petition the state, and it's really hard. And so if you want to buy, there's a secondary market of people who own liquor licenses selling it, right? I was talking to a liquor license broker last week who was telling me that our liquor license sold for $450,000, right? $500,000. That's the standard going rate for them right now. And for the most part, for a long time now. Think about, a new restaurateur, maybe Black, brown, doesn't have the capital. How are they ever going to start a thriving restaurant? We know that it's great to have a restaurant. It's even much better when you're able to sell liquor because people stay, they like to have a good time, right? And so the value of the non-transferable license is that, yes, it wouldn't be transferable, so you wouldn't be able to sell it for $500,000, but it also means that you don't need $500,000 to buy it on the front end. And that we can also target those non-transferable licenses to the neighborhoods that need the most, like Mattapan and Hyde Park and in Dorchester. Like I said, I live on the border of Mattapan and Hyde Park. On Monday, I had a business meeting in Hyde Park, a business dinner, and I could only choose between like 2 restaurants that were open to have this dinner. And so we need more of that. We need more sit-down options. We need more restaurants with liquor licenses. And I think, so I filed with Brian a petition for 200 that would be restricted, and it also would automate the process of getting transferable licenses from the state over the next 10 years. It would be a 10%. Every 10 years, we get 10% more in liquor licenses. And then I filed a petition specifically for Roxbury for 4 restricted licenses for the bowling building, for restaurants that are there and that are coming there that want to operate and have a liquor license. And we're hoping that with those petitions, we can infuse more economic development into our neighborhoods, because with these liquor licenses come jobs, come more thriving communities, come more robust great things to do at night. I'd love to be able to have more going out options at night in Mattapan and Hyde Park, and not always have to go to other really fabulous neighborhoods because I represent the city at large, but I'd love to have more options like really locally where I can wine and dine and have a good time.
Yeah, absolutely. We have another great question from the same person, which I think might bring us to the end of the meeting, but feel free to keep putting questions in the chat, folks in the audience. So you talked a little bit about those liquor licenses are capped at the state level, and several other policies that have been mentioned tonight also have a state component. They're not just enacted at the state level. So this question is, how can the city council coordinate with the Boston legislative delegation to further their shared goals, both at the municipal level and the state level?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Whenever you file a home rule petition, you need a sponsor at the state level, your Boston delegation, to really shepherd it through. There have been a lot of attempts to really reform the liquor license laws, everyone from Marty Walsh to, there's a Senator Eldridge, who passed the local option, like a bill asking for a local option. Hopefully when, we're going to get change in the governor's office this year. And at least for Boston, the reason that we have a cap on liquor's license is why, I really like Freddie's question. I didn't fully nerd out, but I really like your question about history, because it's really important to know where things come from, to know why we're here, as a vestige of when they were creating the liquor laws, a lot of all the other cities, it's based on density, the number of licenses that you can get. But in Boston, we needed a hard cap to control the rowdy Irish Americans that were here, right? So it was really like a discriminatory policy. And I think understanding the root of that is one of the reasons why we can, hopefully work together with our Boston delegation to really change how liquor licenses are doled out in our city.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Councilor. I want to be respectful of your time, but thank you so much for joining us tonight. This was a great conversation, and we really appreciate you taking the time. And for all the great advice you gave to folks who are interested in running for office. I know there's a couple in the audience, and I'm really excited to see what happens. Jessica and Nicole from Benchmark, thank you so much for being our partners in this. Is there anything you'd like to say?
Just really would love to thank the counselor. Thank you so much for the conversation today. I learned so much and we're so excited for you. Just thank you so much for the time and for everyone for joining us today.
Thank you, Jessica. Thank you, Benchmark Strategies. Thank you, MWPC, Kat, and everyone for listening. Sorry, I talk a lot and I talk fast. I'm working on it, but I really enjoyed the conversation.
That was great. That means we get to learn as much as we can in the time that we have. So I love that.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for coming and feel free to keep on tuning into our speaker series. We'll continue to have more. And thank you so much, Councilor, again, for joining us today.
Thank you. And Emily, did you get a chance to put my info in the chat?
I put my info in the chat. They'll find us.
Okay. Feel free to reach out. I'm active on Instagram, Ruthzee for Boston. Send me a DM if you have a question. I'm also on Twitter, whatever. Ruthzee for Boston. I'm here to help and to advise as much as I'm able. And good luck to everyone who's considering this journey for themselves. So it's rewarding, if nothing else. So
thank you all. Have a great night.
bye.